So hi, welcome to End Credit Reviews, an episode of kind of after the credits on End Credit Reviews. This is Tyler from End Credit Reviews,
And Steven from Steven Lawson Studios.
and today we're going to do something a bit different. We do these, of course, once in a while, and the thing is, there's a new Star Wars movie coming out, and it seems like the Star Wars fandom has been divided ever since a guy named Rian Johnson wrote and directed one of them.
Mm-hmm.
However, one thing people have noticed is that in the past few years or so, a lot of people are starting to say a lot more better things than negative things about the Star Wars prequels. I know people can say that maybe the hatred of the Star Wars movies is being directed more towards the Disney ones, and also maybe the goggles of nostalgic feelings are clouding people's judgment.
Sure.
However, I think there's a lot more to that than just those simple things. And I like to call this, of course, the prequel effect. Now, the prequel effect, I'd name it, of course, after the Star Wars prequels. Now, what exactly is the prequel effect? The prequel effect, in my opinion, is about any movie, or maybe in a more broader sense, any form of art or entertainment that may have not have been well liked upon its original creation, but then years go by, or generally generations later goes by, and then it's rediscovered, and it's then seems to get more like than dislike.
Mm-hmm.
For example, historically, the Eiffel Tower, when it was first created, a lot of people in Paris thought it was an eyesore, and now it's hard to imagine the city without the Eiffel Tower. Vincent van Gogh was not very successful at all at his profession at art, and it wasn't until after his death that people started to recognize his art as being excellent and amazing. He's considered now as the, well, even long before now, as the father of modern art. And
Mm-hmm.
also, the book The Great Gatsby was not really a huge success financially or critically. It wasn't until after the death of that author, I forget the name of the author right now of the Great Gatsby, but now that is considered an American literary classic. So that's what I would say about historically. But movie wise, the thing is, the people who saw the Star Wars prequels in theaters when they came out were likely kids to maybe young teenagers, and now they're grown up into being adults now, and they're going on social media, and they're being a lot more vocal about that. So, what are your thoughts on specifically the Star Wars prequels in terms of the prequel effect?
I think that there's a lot of validity to what you're saying, and I I don't want to overstate it because I think there are quite a few people that like the modern Star Wars movies, and I personally find myself veering towards indifferent at this point. It's not that I hate them or that I love them. They have kind of a weird middle ground of just being all right. And but for a lot of people, I know that especially when Rian Johnson came in and kind of derailed the story in terms of a we're going to turn it into something different, and it's not about the Skywalkers anymore, it's about everyone, and burn down everything old, yeah. That just was a middle finger to so much of the fan base. And while I understand that he may have wanted to tell that story, Star Wars was not the place to tell it. And or at least the main Star Wars canon in terms of where a Skywalker or Rey, or of the 9 films that are going to take place, maybe a Rogue One spin-off or something would have been more ideal for that. To do it in a main Star Wars film and kind of just disrespect the source material was not ideal, and even over lots of other films that haven't done well, a level of disrespect that is kind of legendary for this time period. And I definitely think if we're talking about the prequels, that Revenge of the Sith is up there with the best of the Star Wars films.
Definitely.
And there's a reason for that. I think that we can pretty clearly tell that while certain parts of The Phantom Menace and the Clone Wars are decent, I personally have a lot of trouble recalling stuff in the Clone Wars, but it's pretty clear to me that Lucas, in writing, basically the prequel films, that he had a good grasp of the Phantom Menace in terms of I want Darth Sidious to be Palpatine and that to be revealed in the third one. And so there's kind of a strong beginning. I'm not saying the whole film was strong, but that aspect of the Phantom Menace was strong. And then most of Revenge of the Sith was pretty strong because that was the arc of the story. So the Clone Wars was a lot of filler, basically.
You
And
mean
so
Attack of the Clones?
right, Attack of the Clones. Excuse me. Yeah, I must have been saying the Clone Wars because I recently had rewatched the Clone Wars, to you know, or the Clone Wars that was made in 2003 by
Yeah, the micro series.
yeah, the micro series. Um, but basically that's what I would say, that it's definitely not a perfect series, and I similarly think to a lot of people that it's probably second to the original series being 4, 5, and 6. But Revenge of the Sith is particularly a case of don't throw the baby out with the bathwater here. This is definitely worth remembering.
Yeah, I mean, I think also because people had more time to reflect and kind of understand what the true meanings of those movies were, and also to keep in mind that the main thing was when George Lucas made the prequels, he had a plan. Even though there are things that could have been better, he planned things out. The problem with this newer Star Wars movies by Disney, they didn't really do that, which
Mm-hmm.
is a big reason why the prequels have been growing in love and why the sequel trilogy by Disney has kind of been a bit iffy with people. And also, people gave a lot of flack about the midichlorians in the prequels. But keep in mind, George Lucas had time to think about more world building of what he wanted to do, and he thought about the Force in general, and also it being science fiction. I felt like that was fine.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think some things people don't get it probably the first time upon it's that, and then people kind of reflect upon it many years later and they finally get it, kind of similar to Mars Attacks, where a lot of people didn't get that it was trying to spoof those sci-fi movies from like the 50s and 60s.
Sure.
Even the whole thing that kills the Martians at the end, it being like this out of nowhere random song,
Mm.
just plays into how like convoluted weaknesses are in those movies.
Yeah.
It was that's what it was trying to do. It was other moments like that. It was purposely campy and spoofy. And sadly to this very day there are some people who are too dense to realize that, but
Sure.
other than that, it's a guilty pleasure movie of mine. But I would definitely also would say the Spider-Man movies by Sam Raimi. I remember when the Amazing Spider-Man came out, people were coming out of the woodworks like, "Oh yeah, the Amazing Spider-Man is so cool and it's so much better than those lame ones with Tobey Maguire." And that, ironically, when the MCU Spider-Man was being made, people were starting to say less favorable things about the Amazing Spider-Man movies, but people were talking about how much they loved the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies because of how well they were made and how much love and care that the director of those movies had, because he was a big comic book fan, and we kind of appreciate stuff we maybe not understood when we were kids. Yeah, Spider-Man 3 has its problems, but even so there are some interesting competent moments, especially when Peter kind of slaps Mary Jane and then he like realizes what he's become. I feel like that was a very, mature moment
Sure.
in a way. But also, in my opinion, what has really gotten the prequel effect, I've said a lot of times, would be the movie Van Helsing. The movie was not very successful with critics, and because of that, it sort of underperformed at the box office. However, in recent years, people like myself have been talking about on social media why this movie is criminally underrated.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, when the Nostalgia Critic made his video about the movie and he didn't really like the movie that much, I remember the top comment on the video that has at least 1,000 likes is, Well, it said, I unapologetically love this movie. And the thing is, that movie was a nice tipping of the hat of the old Universal monster movies in certain scenes, but also in a way it was really doing something different. And keep in mind that generations have different kind of tropes and cliches that they do with every single movie and how that changes throughout time. I don't want a carbon copy of a movie like it was from generations ago. I want something that's similar but different at the same
Updated.
time.
Yeah.
On top of that, with that, I would say when it comes to subverting expectations, we're talking about like Last Jedi and that.
Mm-hmm.
This movie does a lot of subverting expectations throughout the story, such as, oh, he's gonna kill Dracula the way you would think he would kill a vampire, but it doesn't work. He is a monster hunter who ultimately becomes a werewolf. And the woman he tries to protect from monsters, he ultimately accidentally ends up killing at
Mm-hmm.
the same time. So, what are your thoughts on Van Helsing as the prequel effect?
I definitely agree. It's a little hard to say specifically because there was one Van Helsing where, in the case of Spider Man, there was a trilogy. But I definitely agree that the same problem was present for that, and I'm sure we're going to mention some other films. And there's some more contemporary ones I can name specifically that I'm starting to see symptoms of the prequel effect setting in, but it obviously takes time to develop. The culture kind of needs to form its own, opinion on this, and there are people slower than others who may not be able to see these trends right away. But I definitely agree that Van Helsing, um, I mean, for that matter, I know you love the Mummy films, and I know that there have
Well,
been
the remake with Brendan
right,
Fraser.
right, not
Mummy
the Tom
Returns
Cruise
has
one.
its moments, but I hate Tomb of the Dragon Emperor with a passion.
Right, but I meant specifically the Mummy and the Mummy Returns. I know you really enjoy, and those similarly. I know that recently there had been some idiotic smear campaigns against them, and I mean it's pretty clear from most of the culture, that at least the casual moviegoers, not the fart sniffing critical snobs that think their you know decree is law when it
Dean
comes.
Richards.
But you know, I think that especially in as we were talking about woke culture, that it's easy for these a handful of select people using Twitter or whatever platforms they have to just tear down old things that people have nostalgia for and did something right because it lends them a little credibility, and it's way easier to make profit off of criticizing something and being negative than making something original yourself. So that's not to say that these things do not have flaws. Of course they do. But there is definitely the prequel effect in effect for a lot of things. And I'll just add as the last point. I mean, you can argue certain things have really stood the test of time. I remember, for example, talking about a original critical and financial flop, The Shining was one of those.
Definitely.
And now it is a horror classic, undebatably.
Mm-hmm.
So it really does just take time for certain things to settle in. And surely all the ones we talk about may not be on The Shining's level, but I think to varying degrees, these will ebb and flow.
Yeah, I mean, even when The Mummy turned 20 years old, there was a lot of articles on the internet saying why it still holds up and why a lot of people kind of overlook the fact that the character of Rick O'Connell was kind of a very important kind of stepping stone for the evolution of the main hero protagonist character. In a way, I would argue that you can kind of see qualities of Star-Lord from the Guardians of the Galaxy movies in Rick O'Connell from the Mummy movies.
Mm-hmm.
I would say in certain ways. Like, he's a hero who is tough and does these cool things, but he knows when he's over his head. Like, when he runs away from those soldier mummies in the climax, he's not afraid or he's not a coward. He just knows that, I'm, out of my league right now, so the best thing to do strategically is to go this way
Mm-hmm.
with it. And yeah, Van Helsing, amazing soundtrack, and I just love how people are just rediscovering this movie. And there's been talks about how much they want a sequel to the movie too. When Universal released a clip from the climax of that movie on their official YouTube channel, half the comments were like, "I want a sequel. We should have gotten a sequel to it."
Yep.
I think a much better example, and I think Steven would definitely agree with me on the prequel effect, would be the movie Hocus Pocus. Very big financial failure, and critics didn't like it upon its release. And then it grew gradually throughout time, a pretty strong cult following, and now is considered a Halloween classic. And when Disney had their Halloween show featuring the Sanderson sisters, it completely sold out on opening night. So
Wow.
take it from here, Steven.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. This is a case, and I think largely we can credit this example. I'm not exactly sure when you mentioned that, a theater displayed this and it sold out, but I would venture to guess our generation became at least, the teenage to 20s ballpark, aka we can afford our own things now and support the things that we enjoy. So there may have been a consensus at the time of, oh, it's so childish, blah, 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 get rid of it. But, we grew up and we have a, certain nostalgia and recognize the validity of, a film like Hocus Pocus. Of course, we're not going to argue it's like The Godfather or something. Get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a fun movie. It's got its quirks. And it is a Halloween classic for what it is, especially for kids. There are Halloween classics that are for adults, that are much more violent or much more scary.
Yeah.
And then there's the goofy ones for kids. And Hocus Pocus is clearly one of those.
Speaking of goofy, because we're also talking about Disney.
Yeah.
So like, absolutely. Speaking of goofy,
gorge, fellas.
Yeah, but anyway, speaking of Disney, another Disney movie that I know it hasn't been at least a generation yet, but it's actually been pretty sooner, is the movie John Carter.
Yep.
It's a movie that has been seen as one of Disney's biggest financial failures of all time. However, I've noticed in recent years, people have definitely been saying this movie is really good. They've been rediscovering it on social media, mainly on streaming services, either on Netflix or Disney Plus. And in a recent interview, Taylor Kish has been talking about he was in Europe somewhere, and he was being approached by a lot of people saying, "Oh yeah, I saw John Carter, I loved it," and that. And he said he would love to do another movie. And he said that he really had nothing but good experiences. Sorry, let me rephrase that. He had nothing but good experiences on that movie. And he really hopes that there be another one, as well as William Dafoe said he would be on board with another one. And, with the Mandalorian having a pretty good production budget and, value to it, as well as the popularity of Disney Plus at the moment, I would say maybe they could make another John Carter movie or miniseries on Disney Plus and get the actors to come back. Since it's so popular on their streaming services, maybe that could be the case. And I think another reason why John Carter was not very successful was because of the time, kind of like Mars Attacks, people didn't really understand it. They were like, oh, what's this Star Wars ripoff here? Even though the source material long predates the Star Wars movies.
Yeah, I think especially in the case of John Carter, you have a strong point here. And if they do it first, this could be an opportunity for them to be kind of a front runner for a bunch of franchises that have struggled, but similarly there's kind of some murmurs of, yeah, I'd really like to see some more of that kind of out in the culture. So you mentioned that I guess he was the main actor for John Carter. I can never remember his name.
Taylor Kish. He was approached by people in Europe who were fans of it recently, and so there definitely is an interest out there for this sort of thing. And while the concept of cinema, as we talked about in another video, may be struggling right now, there could be a development of more opportunities with streaming services, things like John Carter,
to be extended, to be told properly, not condensed into 2 hours necessarily, and get the due diligence that they deserve relatively. Obviously, there's going to be more money poured into a film just because a film is 2 hours, so you have more money to dump once than in a bunch of places for episodes. But that, with technology evolving and the implementation of CG and practical effects starting to blend more in the best cases, this is a good time to, start realistically planning, setting that plan forward.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe they'll make a sequel to The Black Cauldron.
Yeah, I would love that, man.
Yeah, I will say I'd rather take those over the cringe fest of live-action Disney remakes.
You know what just hit me right now?
What's that?
I have been replaying with the release the original Kingdom Hearts.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how to feel about this, but I would not be surprised, especially with how much Disney is monopolizing so much of the film industry and TV right now. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to pull either an animated or a live action attempt at a Kingdom Hearts.
Well, the closest thing we had was the House of Mouse TV show.
That's true, but I guess I don't know if we've talked about this specifically on one of our segments, but we've I've kind of talked about what is going to be the next thing. Superheroes are kind of the in thing for the moment, so what is going to be the next big thing in Hollywood? And lots of people, including myself, I think, are speculating either video game adaptations or anime adaptations. And especially if, as might be the case, we're seeing more attempts at anime adaptations right now, it certainly wouldn't surprise me if they grow some cojones and try to attempt that. God knows it could turn out like a Netflix, Death Note atrocity or something like that. But we'll see. We will see.
Yeah, or Alita Battle Angel and be pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, anyway, back to the prequel effect.
Yeah.
Recently, I think one we would strongly agree with is the movie Watchmen has definitely felt the prequel effect.
Very much so.
A lot of people didn't go see it because a lot of diehard purists didn't think that, it was not good because it wasn't a word-for-word adaptation, which no, really any adaptation is really like that, which happens in any adaptation, like a movie adaptation of any other work of fiction.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this movie is excellent, and people have been rediscovering that one. So I'll let you give your 2 cents, Stephen.
Oh, sure. No, I completely agree that in addition to it probably being Snyder's best film that he's made,
Agreed.
It is definitely one that is feeling the prequel effect major league right now. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, for example, HBO is releasing a spin-off series that's a sequel set now in context of that universe. And I've started watching that as well, to be honest. And it's interesting, but, it just ultimately doesn't hold a candle because they're drawing it out, they're trying a bunch of things, and certain things fall flat while other things just evolve into current topical woke culture.
Mm-hmm.
But Watchmen, I mean, some of the biggest complaints were, they didn't do the graphic novel justice because they cut the Black Freighter and stuff. Okay, then watch the extended version. He answered your prayers.
Yeah, the
What's
ultimate
the complaint? I mean, unless your complaint is literally only, and I guess this is a slight spoiler for people who haven't read the graphic novel or seen the Watchmen film, this is your warning.
It's been out for 10 years.
Right. They replaced, instead of from the graphic novel, a giant oogity-boogity telekinetic interdimensional squid monster that was manufactured from Dr. Manhattan's creative energy and a bunch of, tripping acid artists who...
And Alan Moore just being high.
Yes, and Alan Moore just being high, let's be real. With basically the equivalent to a nuclear bomb, except created by Dr. Manhattan's energy. It's an example similar to the Dark Knight and other series that try to incorporate the realism into the film. I think really it's one of the best, not only visual, but written and screen, just general adaptations. And it definitely deserves the praise that it's starting to finally get.
Definitely. And I think another reason why is probably because a lot of comic book movies, especially in the shared cinematic universe ones like the MCU, are kind of a bit too seen as too soft and too predictable. Or Watchmen was a lot darker and took more chances. And also, speaking of Zack Snyder, another movie might be the next to feel a prequel effect would be Batman versus Superman, because
Agreed.
I saw this video on why I love Batman versus Superman. It was from a guy who said years ago I actually hated this movie, but then I rediscovered it and now I love it and understood what was going on.
Yep. Oh, you gonna say more?
Oh, I was gonna let you give your 2 cents on that briefly.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, if we were going to give recommendations on ones that in the future might feel it, I'm already seeing right now in, kind of chats on Reddit and things online frequently, people remembering fondly early chapters of the DCEU, specifically Batman vs. Superman and Man of Steel.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that point, it was still the Snyder vision, and it was grittier. You can say that it was flawed because there were flaws, just as there are flaws in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as well. But you gotta give it that it was going for something different. It was grittier. It was more of a commentary on superheroes and more serious in a more Watchmen-esque take. Not that it was on par with Watchmen necessarily. But it is definitely getting currently a second look. And I honestly hope that picks up back into something to give Snyder a second chance. No guarantees that that's going to happen by any means. But it's good to see that, especially that case, some of the legitimacies that those films offered are starting to be appreciated, albeit a little after the time of its release.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, ultimately, the prequel effect, it just shows that just because a movie is not well liked, or maybe it's not that financially successful, doesn't mean that's not going to stand the test of time, or at least doesn't mean that it's just going to be forgotten about, because that does happen.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I mean, if you look at movies such as Citizen Kane or It's a Wonderful Life, those were box office failures big time, but now they're considered some of the best movies ever made. And with these movies, it just shows that ultimately, in the long run, what matters is if people rediscover it and will want to keep buying it every time it comes to a new home video format.
Right.
Those are the movies that truly stand the test of time. And it's just kind of interesting. It just shows how a movie can redeem itself in a way with maybe it wasn't successful upon its release, but now it's seen in a much more positive light, which makes me happy when there are movies that I like, but people didn't. So who knows, in the future, maybe some other movies will have the prequel effect of some kind. So
absolutely.
My final question to the listeners right now is, what's a movie that you think is either feeling the prequel effect right now, or a movie you're hoping will feel the prequel effect right now? Just leave your comments down below, let us know. And one quick thing of a movie I wanted to also briefly mention, I think is kind of feeling the prequel effect, is Terminator Salvation. Because around the time when Terminator Dark Fate came out and people were so iffy about it, people were kind of looking back on those movies and they were saying, Salvation has problems, but it wasn't too bad, and it probably would have been a better direction to go in than the other failed attempts to reboot the franchise.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Maybe not as strongly, but definitely it was a better case of that. And not to toot my own horn, but I am a active member of the Transformers community, and I'm already seeing, post the Bumblebee film coming out, that quite frankly there are people that are concerned and starting already to feel nostalgia for at least 1 through 3, being Transformers, Revenge of the Fallen, and Dark of the Moon. Some for Age of Extinction as well, but at least the Shia LaBeouf ones, because they are missing that human male connection. You can argue that the current things that they're attempting, and a lot of what they're producing at this moment seems to be in production limbo because I can't remember if it's Viacom or whoever technically owns Paramount at the top. They seem to be saying one thing while the producers and directors clearly are citing more for no, we're going to keep sculpting around prequel series because we want to respect what Michael did, which is honestly the course that I think over time the fan base will try to push out there. But that's another series that I'm so glad is in some ways starting to show signs of the prequel effect. Not as strong as Batman vs. Superman or Watchmen necessarily, but like we said, the seeds are starting to be sown, and they will uproot fruit at some point.
All right, so this is Tyler from End Credit Reviews.
And Steven from Steven Lawson Studios.
And we hope you enjoyed this episode of, well, kind of after the credits on End Credit Reviews, and we hope to make a lot more in the future. Please like and subscribe.